Fear not, listeners, we're the TV Masters, your guides in the world of Battle of the Network shows. Battle of the Network shows. Join Rick Brooks and Mike Kogel as they explore the TV of the 70s and 80s through hand-picked episodes of their favorite and not-so-favorite series.
I'm Mike.
And I'm Rick. Hello, everyone.
And today we're going to be talking about the Dungeons & Dragons animated series.
Ooh, yes. D&D.
We are not D&D aficionados, not nerds, that kind of nerd, I should say. I know I don't listen to any of those podcasts where people play D&D. I'm confused as to why that's the thing, but I liked the cartoon as a kid.
So you never really played the game?
Not a whole lot, yeah. My brother and I tried. We were into fantasy stuff because of the Hobbit animated special and the Return of the King animated special and the Lord of the Rings or weird animated movie and
Wizards and Warriors with Jeff Conaway.
Oh, yeah. And my brother read a lot of fantasy and still does. I've never been able to really enjoy it in reading form. I think there's just too much explaining they have to do that I just want to, I'm more interested in the characters then. So yeah, we tried and I played a tiny bit in high school, but I never played it correctly, I guess. So it was just a game and there was no real role playing. And of course I had seen Mazes and Monsters featuring Tom Hanks and knew that the perils of playing Dungeons and Dragons. You could lose your mind.
Yeah.
You could cry like Tom Hanks.
Oh, man.
But it was around, very aware of it.
Yeah.
And because we had tried to play it, my brother had some of the books, which are really cool to look at. Yeah. The Monster Manual. It was especially cool to look at.
I think they were always present in B. Dalton bookstores.
Yes.
They had a big section of all those Dungeons and Dragons stuff,
Yeah. And there was also a magazine called Dragon that was related to all that kind of stuff. That was pretty cool.
Yeah. I may have started to dabble it or was curious about it, but just never got into it. I actually had the Marvel Superheroes role-playing game.
Yeah. I
never really got that going off the ground.
Yeah.
It's kind of I sort of wanted to, but it was hard for me to wrap my mind around something where everything's so open-ended.
Right.
Yeah. Maybe if I had found somebody that was really into that sort of thing, and I could have gotten into it, but I was more into the sports board games and stuff. That was more my thing.
I mean, I guess there's an element of it that's similar to something like Stratomatic Baseball, where you're rolling to see you're making a choice and then rolling to see what happens.
Right. But it's based on what somebody's telling you happens.
Yes. So they're telling you, there's a story, a module they call it, or you can make your own. You're and now you walk into this room and you have these three choices. So it's and there are video games like that too, right? Where you can open this chest, you can just walk out of the room, or you can cast a spell, and you choose what to do, and then say if you cast a spell, if you're a magic user, you roll a particular die. I think that's in the mod that says, you have to roll this die, and based on your stats, which you've created, also by rolling various dice, then you get a result. And it could be that something cool happens, or it could be a black pudding attacks you. So I think there's an element of choose your own adventure.
Okay.
Where you could, because the game you could die.
Yeah.
And then that's it. You never finish the game.
That would kind of suck.
Yeah, that's, I think, part of the reason. Not excited. And when you start, you're starting with fresh characters and they're not experienced. And it's very easy for that to happen. Or if you're I remember kind of coming up with a character and being into this idea of this character, and then it dies. Yeah. And so as far as I'm concerned, that character's gone.
Yeah. I mean, there's a difference.
You can't bring it back.
It's not finishing fifth in a game of Monopoly is different than having your character killed off early on in Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah.
I'd be playing, Pursue the Pennant was my favorite. It would be it'd have these a wild play chart or whatever where, it would be based on you could have if you roll a certain dice combination, your player might be his leg might be crushed under a tarp during a rain delay. But you're not up there with Dave Kingman and he gets killed. He drops dead during the middle of the game. That doesn't happen.
No, it crashes through the wall.
Yeah. So I was under the impression that I the Dungeon Master would have unlimited power and be controlling so much of this stuff, and I just was a little weird with that. I was well, you have to really trust this guy, or he has to know what he's doing.
I mean, the Dungeon Master is you do have to trust that he's not cheating you, but he is. Everything is based on the module that he's reading.
Okay.
It's almost like he has the teacher textbook.
Ah. That's a good way to put it.
And I guess the way it seems to me, the way now, like those podcasts or like the community episode and things that people who really enjoy it are actually like pretending to be the characters and, you know, doing voices and doing all this stuff and are really into it.
Yeah.
Actually role playing.
Yeah.
Which we just never, I guess, understood.
Now that you mention it, like even
like I would rather just go, like I don't need a game to do that.
Yeah.
Because we did that. We would run around in the woods and like, you know,
play.
fight each other with sticks and stuff.
Yeah, now that you mention it, like even when like the Marvel superheroes game,
It was the same idea.
it was more like, okay, playing a game with Captain, but not like actually being Captain America wasn't the appeal to me so much.
Right, yeah.
Like with the sports games, it's like you're a manager, like as a baseball. It's not like, oh, I'm going to be, you know, like Dave Parker or somebody at bat. So yeah, I guess it wasn't just, well, you know, it just wasn't our thing really.
Yeah, but if you're into it, that's great. And and there are, I mean, they call them the video games, role-playing games, but then I mean, I guess you're kind of in the way you would with a baseball, like an action baseball game where you're swinging and maybe you think of yourself as a player a little bit. But but it does, and you know, and it is a cool thing that it took off from just this hobby or whatever in the 70s. That they were able to create this thing that Hasbro now owns, and there were other games like that too. I think that started that way, like military-based strategy games. And things, and that was kind of the beginnings of it.
Yeah, and this was like nowadays. It seemed like that whole board game culture is a lot stronger.
Yeah,
and like more open. Like it's seems like it's more common to find like you go into a board game store and there's a whole mix of like adult like party games and stuff and whereas back then it was more miniatures and like really the sort of the stereotype of like people being really obsessive about like a more narrow subset, like maybe military games or role-playing games, but like not much in between. Like you'd see the Dungeons and Dragons stuff like in like a bookstore, like I said, but if you go to like a gaming store, you would think of it as, okay, you're going to see like people that are like super into these games and they're spending a lot of, you know, they're buying all the miniatures and maps and paints and making their own things and stuff like that. And so it was a little bit different back then. I don't think it was kind of like, I think there's become this whole like middle ground of like more complex games that don't necessarily require that level of detail or commitment. And
my brother did have some of the miniatures, the little, they called them lead. They weren't lead, but you know, little that you could paint and everything. And they were really cool.
Yeah.
But that was just like, oh, well, that's a cool thing. I want that object.
Yeah.
I don't need to use it in my game necessarily. And they were hard to paint. We tried to paint them. It was possible.
I think that was kind of like an appeal to me. Like is what it seemed like cool. It's like, it just seemed like too much for me to be able to get into.
Yeah.
But it's like, oh yeah, like you'd see those miniatures and like, yeah, they look cool. I mean, it might be fun to have those. And now of course you got like the card-based games and stuff.
Right.
Like, deck building games or Pokemon, things like that, which seem to have sprung from that sort of thing.
And much like Pokemon, there was a cartoon.
Yes.
in the early to mid 80s from Marvel Productions. And I hope I get some of this information correct. I went to Mark Evanier's blog, I watched some videos just to make sure, because if we get it wrong and he hears this, he'll let us know on his blog, which, I mean, in a way it would be fine because he'll put a link up.
I don't want our first contact from him to be him correcting us on Dungeons and Dragons.
Correct. I want it to be him listening to the All-Star Comedy Classic Caper.
Exactly. I think we had questions about that. I'd rather see him address those maybe rather than addressing falsehoods that we say.
Yes, but the great Mark Evanier, who we mentioned before and did write that. What's the correct title? I never.
Was it Yogi's All-Star Comedy Christmas Caper?
I think so. We did an episode about it anyway. As we've said before, wrote for many sitcoms and variety shows and cartoons. And the most notable cartoon later was Garfield and Friends, which he wrote for a number, I don't know, 8 years or some ridiculous amount of. And he wrote almost every episode himself.
Kind of like a lot of our sweet spot of like mid 70s to early 80s television.
Yeah.
Like the people that inhabit it and the types of shows that you love. There's a chances are very good that he's got a great story about anything that you could think of from that era.
Yes. And comics, if I didn't mention
If he didn't work on it directly, he knows somebody that did.
So now Marvel was developing this. I believe they had tried to do with one of the co-creators, Dennis Marks, a similar show, but it didn't have any tie-in to any known product. And whoever they tried to sell it to didn't buy it. And so then they got the license for Dungeons and Dragons and were reworking it. It became a big mess, and CBS wasn't ready to buy it. They wanted to buy it, but it wasn't ready. And so they brought in Mark Evanier to shore it up so he gets a developed by credit. And in something like 3 or 4 days, he whittled it all down, wrote a Bible, story Bible or show Bible, and wrote the pilot, and they bought it.
It's funny because many of his stories involve him doing something in a ridiculously
Yes.
brief amount of time, right?
Yeah,
So it's not a surprise, I guess.
no, and then they did some revisions, and then he moved on to other things.
Mhm.
So then mostly he gives credit then to, and I should say there's another guy whose name I'm always forgetting, Kevin Paul Coates, who has a creator credit, and I can't find anything about exactly what he did, but it was clearly one of the hands.
Yeah, I think I saw the name and was
Yeah.
wondering about him.
His only other credit is writing some episodes of Battle of the Planets,
Interesting.
which would be
Battle of the
more
Planets.
like rewriting. I mean,
Right.
taking existing things and turning them into an American version. But so I don't know exactly what his involvement was. Dennis Marks wrote all sorts of cartoons too in the Transformers movie. But anyway, he gives credit to a guy, Henry Soroyan, who was the story editor and the voice director for a lot of the casting and hiring the right writers and things. And then 3 seasons, but 27 episodes because it's animation.
Yeah.
It's
But pretty successful.
Yeah.
It seems like it did well.
yeah, and pretty high production values for back then. Like a lot of these Marvel shows, they put some effort into it.
Yeah, I was kind of surprised that Marvel Entertainment was involved in this. I didn't remember that at all.
I watched part of a Comic-Con panel that he was on last year celebrating the 40th anniversary, and Mark Evanier was on. He mentioned that like Marvel Animation wanted, even though they could do like Spider-Man, and they did, they wanted to do all sorts of things, just be seen as an animation studio.
Right, okay.
So this is one of those kind of things.
Oh, okay.
Muppet Babies and all kinds of stuff I don't even know about that they did. But I didn't watch all the panel because some of it was just a guy who wrote a comic adaptation a few years ago or something. I'm like, right now I don't have time to listen to what you have to say about that guy. But a really interesting cast too. And I feel like this whole cartoon is like it's old home day here at Battle of the Network Show.
Oh, that's a nice way of putting it. Oh, yeah.
So as Hank, Willie Ames,
Yeah.
of course from 8 is Enough, and Charles in Charge. We haven't done Charles in Charge.
No, we haven't.
No, Adam Rich from 8 is Enough as Presto, the magician. His name apparently is Albert. Did they ever say that?
Laura and I were watching it, and we heard that word. We heard somebody call him Albert. And we she's like, I didn't know he had a name.
Yeah.
And Presto. It's like, oh yeah.
Eric, the Cavalier, voiced by Don Most, Ralph Malph himself. Then Sheila is voiced by Katie Lee. I don't believe she's done anything covered yet, but a prolific cartoon voice actor is one of her early roles. Bobby, played by Teddy Field III. Again, we haven't covered anything, but his other credit is the Mr. T cartoon.
Okay.
Diana, played by Tanya Gale Smith. This is the most interesting one to me. Her only other role is as fan number 1 in the Facts of Life Starstruck episode that we covered.
What? I didn't know that.
Not number 1 fan, of course, because that's Tootie.
Yes.
But fan number 1.
Wow. Oh, that's fascinating.
Venger, the villain, is played by Peter Cullen.
Yes, that's
Optimus Prime himself.
That's good. Recognized him right away.
Yes. Frank Welker plays Uni the Unicorn.
Okay.
And then Sidney Miller plays Dungeon Master. And I'm fascinated by this guy. Looked him up.
Yeah.
One, he was born in 1916, and he started acting in 1930.
Wait a minute, he was born in
1916.
1916. Oh, okay.
16,
okay.
not 60.
Okay.
Yes, he was born in 1960, but started acting in 1930.
Yeah, no wonder you're interested in it.
Some of his roles include Mama Ooze on Sigmund and the Sea Monsters, and Hitler.
What? Wow.
In a Jerry Lewis movie, Which Way to the Front, something like that.
Wow, that's a diverse resume already.
He was also directed a lot of TV, going back to the 50s.
Oh.
And it all seemed to be one episode, be like one episode of The Addams Family, and one episode of this and that. And at least one movie, Get Yourself a College Girl.
Oh, that was a rock movie, right?
Yeah.
Was it Ermin's Ermits or Dave Clark 5?
I'm not sure.
Okay, I think one of them was...
Yeah, interesting guy there.
Wow.
Yeah,
that is interesting. What a
and
career.
Given how enigmatic Dungeon Master is, it seems appropriate that a guy with this varied career.
Yes, good call. Yeah.
Some writers we've at least mentioned before. Well, Buzz Dixon wrote the G.I. Joe episode we talked about.
Yeah.
Steve Gerber, I know we've at least mentioned him.
Yeah.
But creator of Howard the Duck and other things. And the writer of our episode, Jeffrey Scott. Genius Award
Good
winner.
old Jeffrey Scott.
Who wrote 6 or 7 at least.
Always delivers.
Yeah. So, already an impressive group of people there.
Now, so you watched the show when it was on.
Yeah,
I did not watch the show when it was on.
Exciting.
Yeah, I can't say why or why not, but I just never... I knew very, very little about this and relying on you to do the heavy lifting in this episode because I don't have much experience with the show, but my amazing wife Lori, she did watch it, did remember it, and has the DVDs. But yeah, not me. I just didn't. And actually, I got to tell Lori about the link to Battle of the Planets, because that's another one that she
Yeah,
really
I watched
enjoyed.
that a lot. The premise, which the opening credits delineate perfectly.
Yeah.
So you can just dive into the show.
Without a song, too.
Without a
which
song.
is impressive, because most television requires an actual song with lyrics and a catchy melody
Yeah.
to get a premise across. This one does it without
This
it.
is
which
very
impressive.
like a comic book kind of, Mark Evaner's comic book storytelling. I mean, because a lot of it's just the images too. And I mean, there's some dialogue, but
Yeah.
so there's a group of kids, mostly teenagers, and one younger kid tag along.
Sibling, yeah.
Yeah,
Little brother.
sibling, little brother, at an amusement park, and they get on. Hey, there's the Dungeons and Dragons ride. So they get on this ride. It's like they call it a dark ride, and they're going along the tracks, and suddenly it changes, and they end up in the realm of Dungeons and Dragons. And there's Tiamat, the many-headed dragon, and this guy Venger, and the main villain of the show, and then the Dungeon Master, this little dude.
Yeah.
He gives them all magic weapons and names, some of them based on the classes of characters you could have in Dungeons and Dragons. And got Hank is the ranger. He has a bow that shoots like energy arrows.
Yeah. Blast arrows.
Blast arrow. They can do all sorts of things. Lassos,
Right.
fireworks. Presto is a magician. He's got a hat that he can pull magic stuff out of. It doesn't usually work quite the way he wants, but quite often still helps. Eric, the cavalier, and he is the malcontent of the crew. He seems to maybe have more money than them. There's always skeptical of everything, and Mark Evaner has some interesting thoughts about him.
Oh,
I will come back to
yes.
in a second.
Let's hold that. Okay.
Yeah.
He's the most interesting character to me, too.
I think he is now, and I think Don Most is hilarious.
Yeah.
Sheila, who is the thief, and she has a cloak of invisibility. Her little brother Bobby is the barbarian. He has a magic club, which, that's a good fit. Little kids like to smash stuff,
He's
right?
kind of like Bam Bam.
Yeah. And then Diana, who is acrobat, and she's got a magic, they call it a javelin. It does not have a pointy part, but she uses it for all sorts of both defensive and, I guess, offensive
Like
ways.
a lot of like pole vaulting maneuvers.
Yes, and and it can change sizes, and she can even break it and put it back together. In some episode, they mentioned that was a some sort of state champion gymnast, so she has natural skills.
Right. Okay.
She's African American.
Yeah, which is not commented on, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, that's right. She's just part of the gang.
And that's interesting for that time.
And then they also pick up Uni the unicorn.
Uni,
who's a tiny, cute unicorn. He usually hangs out with Bobby, but apes what other people say. Like if they say, yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. So
Uni adorable without being insufferable, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Surprisingly to me.
I mean, always on the edge of becoming insufferable. And then, yes, the Dungeon Master is their guide in the realm of Dungeons and Dragons. But of course, there are all these hints about, he seems to have brought them there to help him fight Venger. He seems to have some sort of secret agenda.
Yeah,
and he keeps teasing them, because that's the main thing is that, they're here, they're stuck, they're trying to get home.
Yeah.
And they have to go on these quests, and all the quests maybe will lead them their way home. And it never does. They get close sometimes.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, they're accomplishing tasks for him.
Him, the Dungeon Master, I find slightly less adorable, but much more insufferable than Uni. I'm guessing there's not like a post where Mark Evaner lays out what he'd I'd always planned for at the end of the series, the Dungeon Master to reveal that blah blah blah.
No, there's this thing. One of the writers wrote a quote unquote finale that people have turned into like audio plays, but it wasn't. He didn't. I see differing things about it, but Mark Evaner's take on it, granted he wasn't with the show anymore, is that he wrote it after the fact because of the way the production lead time, there's no way to know when you're going to get canceled. So there's no way to write a finale.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
You're writing from February to June, and they're making episodes from June until like the rest of the year, till February or something. And you just, and that he's like, because the script was online, and he's like, I've read it. It's not what I would have done, but other writers have their own ideas. And then his show Bible is out there somewhere. can.
Is that other story the one where they're still in this as grown-ups, that they're still in that world?
No. They go home.
Okay.
I think they go home. I don't know. I haven't read.
Because I saw like a reference to something that was, and it just.
Well,
Maybe it was a cameo.
Yes, in the Dungeons and Dragons movie from last year, or they show up. They're adult.
That depresses me.
It is depressing, and some of them look a little rough. Bobby looks a little rough in particular.
Oh boy! Okay.
And they're still in the same costumes with the same weapons. I mean, it's kind of cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know if he would have ever. I mean, that's just not how cartoons work.
You're right. Right.
And to me, as a kid, I think especially there was a little bit of as much as, of course, the coolness would go away if they went home. I wanted them to get home. Like there was unresolved tension there that maybe was a little frustrating, kind of like another show we're going to talk about this season. And kind of like Lost in Space, or where you're always trying to accomplish something and you're never going to accomplish it.
Yeah, I have an example of a show that did things a little bit differently that we'll talk about when we talk about
the other show.
Saturday morning. No, when we talk about Saturday morning.
Okay, yeah.
A cartoon that surprises by doing something a little bit differently.
Okay, but that's the basic deal. And then they go on these quests and they sometimes get into pretty traumatic situations. And sometimes it's just fun, which this episode is more that.
And often going up against Venger.
Yes.
But some other...
is enigmatic too, other than his usual evil person wanting to rule the world.
Yes.
But definitely distinctive looking. I mean, fangs, he's got one horn, bat wings that may or may not be part of his costume. There's an episode where they meet his sister.
Oh,
and she puts on an identical costume, and she doesn't get the wings until she has the costume. It's weird. It's magic. And there's an episode where at the end, Dungeon Master, again, enigmatically says to himself something about that Venger was once his student or something.
Well, Lori and I were watching an episode the other day where he calls
him son.
He calls him son.
Yeah.
My son. But I don't know if it was like generically or like condescendingly or literally.
Yeah, I didn't take it literally. Or condescend. I just...
Because it's just something like my son.
Yeah, Rye is my son.
Yeah,
I didn't... I took it as...
Well...
figurative.
Yes.
But maybe. I don't know. Because he is some sort of species dungeon master. There's an episode with a female.
Ooh.
A dungeon mistress, if you will. But I don't know. And it seems I would have to... I thought there would be a great fan wiki, fandom.
Yeah.
It would have these monsters appear in this episode and they're from the monster... And no. So, it does seem like, from my memory of looking at that, they do take a lot of stuff directly from the sources they already had, but I think they also just make stuff up.
Yeah. So at the time, there wasn't like a lot of merchandising of the cartoon, but now there has been the last couple of years, which led me to believe that there was like a pretty strong cult following.
Yeah, I think there were. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, Hasbro made some figures that are not great quality, and now Super 7 is making some that are too high quality for my checkbook. Yeah, and around the time the cartoon came out, there was a Dungeons and Dragons toy line, but it didn't have anything to do with it. Had already started, I guess.
Right. Now I've got
Warduke.
Who happens to
be in this episode.
To show up in this,
yes.
but it was not like a regular character in the cartoon.
So the cartoon, they were able to use the toys, but the toys were not able to use the cartoons.
Okay.
I guess. And I think in one of those things Mark Avenir talked about there being way too many recurring characters beyond Dungeon Master and Venger. And so I think maybe some of them might have been toy characters. Like they were going to be in a lot more episodes to sell toys and just got rid of them. It just was too much.
Okay, so originally there were too many recurring characters.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, he narrowed it all down.
Okay.
So Eric, I'll go ahead and get into this. I found it really interesting. He said on his blog that at the time there was a feeling, from among children's TV producers that you always had to show somebody, always had to show the importance of being part of the team, part of the group. And a way to do that was to have a character who disagreed with them and then was proven to be wrong. And he hated that because sometimes the group is wrong.
Yeah.
I mean, he makes a good point. He was told he had to have a character like that in it. And so he didn't like that character, but he did it. And he gives a more extreme example of the get along gang. Now, I see his point because he is almost always wrong. It seems to me in the later episodes he's a little less of a malcontent, and sometimes the other characters have been wrong too. But but it is sort of like Oscar the Grouch or something too. Except for he's a bit of a coward.
I see him. I didn't see him that way at all. I saw him as more sarcastic, but I actually, in my limited exposure to the series, I see him as the most sensible one among them. because he's questioning things,
Yeah.
and everything he says like makes sense, or he's right to question this, or he's right to push back against this, and maybe he turns out to be. I don't see him so much as turning out to be wrong, but like raising interesting questions that. A lot of the stuff that he pushes back against doesn't really seem to be resolved, in my opinion. So, if that's the intent, I didn't quite get it.
I mean,
like
I think
that.
some of the, but sometimes he's just like, there's an obvious morally right thing to do, and he doesn't want to do it
Okay, yeah, like
out of self-preservation.
right, and like in this episode, I can see that kind of message where of like the team and the benefits of teamwork. I can see that part of it, but to me, a lot of it is also just like him, like he's the only one talking sense here. Like, why would you do this? You know?
Right, and he's the comic relief.
Yeah,
because he's always falling down and getting turned into monsters.
I think in that way, and in like his cowardice, like you said, it definitely exposes like something about the character, and I certainly see that he's there as a contrast.
Right, and it's even pointed in the opening. He's one of the people who's like, "Oh, come on, or give me a break."
Yeah. It kind of makes you wonder why he's hanging out with him in the first place.
Yeah, I don't know. They never really get into any of that stuff.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of cool that there's no backstory.
Yeah,
I like the fact too that there's no like origin story, that it's just in that part.
Yeah.
And like, because now if you're doing that show, of course you would maybe have like set it up, but then you'd go back and you'd do one whole episode like showing each character before they got into this situation. Mm-hmm. If you were doing a live action, particularly.
Yeah.
And I like this, just throw them in there, and we can learn about them along the way.
Which I think is part of that. I mean, just the way they did TV back then, but also animation, that these things are designed to repeat.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So you can't really have a strong continuity element. But you're right. It would be like Lost. Every episode would have, it's an Eric episode.
Yes.
How does his life before reflect his life now?
What made Eric be so, skeptical of magic? And
right. I did notice it seemed like in some of the later episodes, there were very subtle implication that Hank and Sheila are an item. Mm-hmm. But I don't know, maybe they're just friends.
Yeah.
But a couple of times, like, they're all like sitting up, like sleeping against trees and stuff, and they're kind of sitting against each other.
Yeah.
That implied to me something.
Yeah, I can see that. It's a pretty big cast.
Yeah.
I mean, Scooby-Doo was what, like 5 plus Scooby? So it'd be 6. So
that's about the same as Scooby-Doo.
But it seems like, a lot of things, maybe 3 or 4, and, maybe So I'm impressed, I guess, by the fact that they have this many main characters and with different abilities and stuff, and that they managed to give each one a bit of business in a lot of these episodes.
Do find there's some episodes that they managed to focus mostly on one, or have one go through a particular thing. But still not leave out anyone.
I like when there's, and this one has a very, very tame fight scene. But I like when it's kind of like I like in comic books when we actually see superheroes like teaming up, and like doing things that actually require teamwork instead of just like you hit him and then I hit him, but like actually working together,
right?
And combining their abilities like that. I like that, and this at least sort of makes that attempt sometimes.
Yeah. Hank's the leader. Yeah, like scatter.
Yeah. Or
I like that strategy.
My favorite strategy: presto, do something.
Yeah,
do something with your magic.
We know it's not going to work. But
can't get any worse.
I'll tell you one thing I don't love: the way Presto and Bobby scream. Very grating.
Yeah. I think Lori thought Presto's voice in general was very annoying, but I think she said that right after he did some kind of like yell, probably what pushed her over the edge.
Already Adam Rich getting away from his cute thing. Poor guy.
Where is he in the adorable and insufferable scale?
Ooh, I don't know. I guess when he's doing a Who's on First riff, he's all adorable.
True. When he's nearly setting things on fire, that's pretty insufferable.
This is a Jeff Foxworthy bit.
You might be insufferable.
Yeah, you might be insufferable. You nearly set the house on fire. I guess we should talk about this episode. I don't know if you could figure out when it originally aired.
Well, I multiple sources. I think I've got a premiere date.
Okay.
Which can be difficult in the world of Saturday morning animation. Mm-hmm. But so batten down the hatches because it's going to take a while to get through what was on Saturday morning. But the information I had was October 15th, 1983.
Okay.
And here's something interesting that took place on that day was Game 4 of the World Series between Baltimore and Philadelphia. And it was shortly after the Saturday morning lineup. I think it started at like 1 or 1:30.
Whoa.
Which is interesting because you don't have daytime anything anymore as far as like major, like a finals. It's all like about primetime audiences. And this was one of the last scheduled daytime games. It wasn't the last, but it was one of the last scheduled daytime World Series games. Mm-hmm. It's kind of weird on a Saturday. Now you think, well, wow, they would just put the World Series in the afternoon. It seems weird, but at the time it wasn't that unusual, to have daytime World Series games.
Yeah.
But before that, we'll start at 8 a.m. and let's go with CBS, which was the network of Dungeons and Dragons. Mm-hmm. CBS, the network of Dungeons and Dragons. think Pat Summerall used to say that,
Yeah.
speaking of sports during the football games.
You know what else? In that Comic-Con panel, Mark Evanier gives CBS a lot of credit for letting their cartoon people do Saturday morning people do interesting stuff.
Oh, really?
This and the woman whose name I forget.
Margaret.
No, not Margaret Lesh. Judy something, who was the head of CBS
Okay.
Saturday morning. Let them do a lot with this. And he said Garfield and Friends, they didn't even give, after a while, they didn't even have to show them scripts or anything.
Nice.
They would just watch it when it was done. And if they saw stuff they liked it, they'd say, do more of that.
Cool.
And she's whoever, she put Pee-wee's Playhouse on, and I guess Pryor's Place.
That's right, yeah. That's funny, because you wouldn't think of CBS
No.
as being, particularly
And she had
avant-garde.
been at ABC before that, so maybe ABC was interesting.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, some of the more
Or
unique
whenever Fred Silverman left the network, she switched to the other. They just kept
shows. They
swapping.
couldn't occupy the same space
That's right,
at any
yeah.
one time. All right, so CBS began with, here's a fascinating, groundbreaking show at 8, The Biscuits. You remember this one? They were like dog-like characters, and it was some kind of magical forest, and they had like some regular enemy they fought against. I didn't watch this. I remember them from like the ads and stuff.
Okay.
The Biscuits, Biskitts, trademarkable. Okay, 8:30 was Saturday Supercade. Video games like Hubert.
Yeah.
Rotating like cartoon.
That's right.
Video games. 9:30 was Dungeons and Dragons. 10 o'clock, The Dukes, the animated adaptation of Dukes of Hazzard. 10:30, Charlie Brown and Snoopy.
Oh wow, that's right.
And I believe this particular Saturday might have been the first episode of that. 11 a.m., this is one I totally forgot about. Benji, Zax, and the Alien Prince. So the creator of Benji
the dog?
Yes, the lovable dog. It was a live action show. And there was like a alien prince who was like running away from like some enemy that was trying to take over his throne or something like that. And like a robot named Zax. Zax was like the robot or something. This was like a live action series, and Benji the dog like befriended them, and they had like adventures while trying to escape like some evil alien.
Was Filmation involved in this one somehow?
11:30 a.m. Talk about a stalwart, the Bugs Bunny Roadrunner show.
Oh, yeah.
And on this particular Saturday, football coverage started. College football started at noon after that. NBC.
Oh, yeah.
We got the Flintstone Funnies, which is like a repackaged version of like some of the Flintstones comedy hour segments from years before. It's still funny to think of like the Flintstones being on NBC as late as 1983, but they had a good run. 8:30 Shirt Tales. 9 o'clock The Smurfs, which was on for an hour and a half. The Smurfs was big back then.
See, talk about a group with Grouchy.
Yes.
Grouchy, yeah. And Brainy.
Yeah.
They're both malcontents.
That's right.
I don't know if there were any in the Shirt Tails all got along.
Yeah. I'm not sure either, yeah. 10:30 was Alvin and the Chipmunks. 11 o'clock, Mr. T.
Now, Alvin and the Chipmunks is built around.
That's the whole point, yeah.
Yes.
Right, that's right.
That's it, but he's the hero of the show.
He is, yes. Now, Mr. T, I think, I'm trying to remember, I don't know.
Pity the fool who doesn't get along with the group.
Yeah, on one hand, there must have been a kid but how could you realistically have a kid mouthing off to Mr. T?
Yeah.
I don't know if there's a lot of that going on.
But Mr. T. Is that what you just said, Mr. T? I interrupted.
Yeah, Mr. T at 11 o'clock.
Okay.
11:30, The Amazing Spider-Man Incredible Hulk Hour. And 12:30, Thundar the Barbarian.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Remember, Thundar going way into the afternoon. So that's interesting. Like 2 hours of kind of like more adventure themed, boy-themed cartoons then. Okay, so ABC. Now, here's where it gets wild. Scooby-Doo, like the best of Scooby-Doo at 8. And they actually would put like Menudo in the listing. So Menudo would make appearances.
Right, yeah.
At 8:30, The Mon Chi-Chi's Little Rascals Richie Rich Hour.
Of course.
9:30, The Pac-Man Rubik's Cube Hour, with also appearances by Menudo. I love the fact that Menudo was like luring viewers, that they had to...
I just love the fads of 1983 hour.
Yes, that's right. 10:30, The Littles. 11 o'clock, The Puppy's Further Adventures. Now, this is like another like Ruby Spears cartoon, I believe.
Okay.
So I think this was the second season. So they had the puppy,
yeah,
and then The Puppy's Further Adventures. Now, here's why I mentioned this earlier. So the first season, the puppy and his friends were like separated from his family, his boy, as he said, like on some boat. There was some like kind of thing at sea, and they got separated. And he spent the first season trying to reunite with his family.
Oh, wow.
At the end of the first season, they actually did. And then the second season had the same characters, like the puppy and his pals, but like they just had new adventures.
Yeah.
So they actually resolved that storyline at some point, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Kind of surprising, actually, right? 11:30 was more Scooby-Doo. Scooby and Scrappy, I think, at this point. Yeah. And this Saturday, anyways, they had the weekend special, at 12 o'clock.
Right.
So there you go. That's Saturday morning, October 1983.
No Super Friends.
No, sadly, no Super Friends.
Guess they were done by then, right?
Conspicuous by its... And then
or
did
they come back?
I think,
yeah. The superpowers
took
version.
some time off.
Yeah, they needed to. All that world saving. and crafting. They needed to take a break.
Now, of course, on the Super Friends, we had the character who was against the team and always proven to be wrong was Aquaman.
Yes.
I like this, Mike. I'm going to go through some of the cartoons and look for this at the era because I think
another good example would be Rudy on Fat Albert.
That's perfect. Yes.
I mean, to me, that's maybe the perfect example.
Yeah. Oh, good one. Okay. Yeah, I'm going to look for these now. Very cool. Despite irritating, I'm sure if you're a creative,
right?
But as a viewer now looking back 40 years ago, kind of interesting.
Yes. Okay. So and this episode is called "In Search of the Dungeon Master." It seems to be listed as the 5th episode on the DVDs and stuff. I don't always trust it with the cartoons, but we'll go with that. And it opens in a forest, very large trees. It's nice backgrounds there. And Eric is already he's being a pill. One of them says that Dungeon Master said, we find a clue to home in a forest with no trees. And Eric calls Dungeon Master an airhead.
Yeah, it's pretty blatant.
Yeah. Presto says, who knows what he meant? And this is the good thing about Dungeon Master. He's always speaking in riddles. Mm-hmm. Just say what you mean, man.
Yeah.
See, he's trying, that's my feeling. Like he's trying to teach them, or he's using them to accomplish his goals, but also teach them about whatever.
Yeah.
They're on their way to becoming adults, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like there's an episode you were talking about, where at the end they make a choice and he's like, hey, taking your first step closer to home or something like that. Basically, by discovering more about yourself, you'll get home.
Yeah. See, I've read it as, I hadn't read it the way about him using them for some purpose of his or needing them. Yeah. It's more of like him teaching them something.
I think it's both.
Okay, that's interesting. I hadn't looked at that way.
I think he pulled them there.
Okay. For
some reason, he saw potential in them to be his warriors against Venger and other assorted evil people.
Right.
In protecting the realm of Dungeons and Dragons. And then, Diana, who I feel like next to Hank is the most competent sort of leader type and also skilled athlete, as we said. And she's like, oh, those are the magic words. He didn't mean N-O trees. He meant K-N-O-W trees, which she finger spells. I thought that was cool. Like, sign language finger spell.
Yeah.
And so trees that know something.
Okay.
Which is a little weird, but they're in the realm of Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah. I mean, everybody except Eric seems to accept this as like a thing,
they're like
Eric
okay.
was kind of foolish for not realizing that.
Yeah, we don't know what that means, but yeah. And then Dungeon Master is, meanwhile, he's riding through the same forest. This might be the coolest thing Dungeon Master ever does. On a giant snail.
Yeah.
And there's a fairy flying next to him.
Yeah.
And then Warduke, who we mentioned, the toy, a very cool toy, by the way.
Yeah, looks very cool.
Yes, so he is a...
I mean, you can tell why I wanted this figure as a youth, despite not playing the game or anything, or really knowing anything about the character.
Yeah.
I just visually liked him.
So he's got blue... kind of spiky helmet on, kind of like a little bit like a Roman helmet. So, and behind it, his face, there's this black, except for red eyes. Already cool. Mm-hmm. Then he's shirtless, except for a big red medallion. And one sleeve is covered in like chainmail, blue chainmail. And he's got a glove on that hand. He's got blue chainmail on that leg. Mm-hmm. So he has fur shorts. His other leg is bare, and he's got black boots and some spiky metal things. He's like, I've seen him compared to Boba Fett. Wow. He's mysterious.
Yeah.
Toy collectors dig him. Like the NECA released a version of him that seemed to the YouTube toy people love.
I'm thinking this might have been like an impulse buy or impulse, please get me impulse request at a store somewhere, because I don't think I would have known enough to ask for him ahead of time. Yeah. So I'm thinking this must have been something, I was good at the store and got this as a reward.
I ended up having like the first, I guess 6 or 7 of these.
Oh, really?
So there's Warduke, there's the Knight Strongheart, there's a dwarf, a goblin, a couple wizards, and a cleric, and an elf, who I just noticed yesterday. His name is Melf.
M-E-L.
M-E-L-F. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. But they were pretty cool. I mean, made by LJN, who I don't think was known for making action figures. But I remember like seeing them at weird places too. Not like just the toy store, but like we had this kind of, I don't know what, a Woolworthsy type place called McCrory's in one of our malls, and I remember finding them there, or like the drugstore, just kind of odd places. But they're pretty neat. They're a little bigger than figures of the time, your G.I. Joes and Star Wars, so they didn't quite fit in with my other figures. But it's cool that he's here in the animated version. Looks pretty dead on.
Right.
And he, he's got a mysterious voice, and he's leading a group of frogmen, which I mean frog people,
Yes.
not divers.
No.
Frogmen with turtle shells, and I think they call them bullywogs. Is that?
Yeah, I wasn't sure exactly what they were saying, but now that you say it, I think that's.
And they attack, and Dungeon Master is having fun kind of fighting them, and they are not particularly competent. They more just numbers, I think.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
That's their main benefit. But Warduke, he teleports himself into a tree, and then Warduke uses his magic sword, because of course it's Saturday morning, so you can't use a sword the way you use a sword, to freeze the tree, which then freezes Dungeon Master.
Yeah.
And he has a pendant on that is blinking red. So then we go back to the team, and there's a talking tree, which is the no tree. And he says he knows everything there is to know. And so they ask who won the '81 World Series, and he says the Greywood Elves. But if you mean in your world, the Dodgers beat over the Yankees 4-2.
He does know everything.
Yeah, and then he interrupts himself because he now knows that Dungeon Master is in danger. So they go off to help, but they don't really know where they're going. He doesn't give them that information, apparently. And meanwhile, Warduke is taking him to some caves, and the frog guys attack them, and they're doing fairly well against them. Like you said, some teamwork, right? And then Presto pulls giant flies out of his hat, which seems like a dud, but then, they're frog guys, so...
Yeah, so it's like a distraction.
Yeah, but giant flies.
Again, more like the indirect action in this.
Yeah.
Like Bobby's club, he uses it to pound the ground, not people.
That's right.
And more like sort of like getting around it, which is funny that this show was criticized for being so violent.
Right, because there isn't.
Yeah, I mean, it seems impossibly tame today.
Yeah.
But at the time, people complained.
So after they finish that, Eric doesn't want to help Dungeon Master, but the fairy shows up and it knows the way.
Yeah, and Eric had suggested like buying their way home with cash.
Yeah.
Which is interesting, and maybe reveals something about Eric, just that he's well off, like we said. And it seems like maybe an impractical idea, but not one worth ruling out entirely. I would say.
Right. They do point out that his money's probably worthless.
Yeah.
And in the caves, the shadow demon, who's a demon.
Yeah, I wondered if does that guy, he doesn't have a name or anything.
They actually address him as Shadow Demon.
Okay. Not like Larry or something.
No, that would be cool though.
Larry.
Yes, master. He's talking to Warduke, and Warduke is showing him his prize and says the red glow means Dungeon Master's still alive, and that he's Vengers for the right price.
Yes, the life force is still with him.
Yes.
Even the suggestion of that seems a little, I don't know, it seems like in the context of everything else we talked about, it seems like that's kind of pushing it even to suggest. I guess he's in, what, they don't say this, I was kind of hoping they would, but as a comic book fan, suspended animation.
Exactly.
A state of suspended animation.
Yes. They also use that in animation too, when they don't have to draw a character moving.
Yeah, right. Yeah, suspended animation was very popular in TV animation for a while, wasn't it?
Somebody got assigned. Well, you get Dungeon Master in the episode. I mean, after the giant snail, he's just in ice.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So then the group is on the side of a mountain, a kind of a very narrow trail on the side of a mountain. Presto takes out his hat to do something and drops it into this gorge, and it comes back up with some creatures that I think they're griffins or something, like winged lion things. And they're actually friendly and carry them to safety. And then they reach the mouth of this cave, and it is a mouth with teeth and stuff.
Yeah.
And Eric bails. He's going to go do his own thing. So the rest of them go inside, and it's spooky. There's lava, usual things. And then they encounter this big rock monster and tell Presto to do something. He pulls out a stop sign. So that doesn't help at all.
I thought it was kind of a Kirby-esque rock monster.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, definitely. And it had claws too. Not all your rock monsters have claws.
That's true. Yeah.
And it chases them to a dead end, and then Sheila steps up and she taunts the monster, distracts him, and then is using her invisibility cloak to confuse him while the others run off. But then they run into some orcs. So orcs, I believe, created it by Tolkien in the Lord of the Rings books, but they're in this version, at least, they're big pigmen. So we've had frogmen, we've had a giant snail, and now we got some pigmen. And they welcome them to the slave mines, which seems to be a running theme in a number of episodes too, of creatures like dwarves and gnomes enslaved to do mining and other kind of dirty jobs for Venger.
Yeah. Is this like I wonder if this is a recurring theme in like Dungeons and Dragons in
I
general?
don't think so.
Yeah.
I mean, it might be.
Yeah.
But you can be a dwarf. I think you can be a gnome. I don't know what you can be now. It's much more complicated than it used to be. But
well, there's advanced Dungeons and Dragons.
oh, yes, of course. There's basic and advanced. Meanwhile, Eric is trudging through a swamp alone, and he almost gets captured by some sort of octopusy type creature, and then encounters a zombie, a pretty ugly zombie. I mean, zombies aren't usually attractive, but it's pretty gruesome for Saturday morning.
Yeah. Now I think this is the moment where like you don't see him at first, and then he turns around, and
yeah,
like Eric kind of reacts, and there's kind of a cool little animation thing where it's almost like an anime thing where Eric's head like gets bigger.
Yeah.
You see like a skull, or it just like his eyes bug out, and it's like I was like, oh, that's actually a pretty cool touch.
Yeah, there's definitely it's subtle, but there's an anime feel to these. There are a lot of sweat drops too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
And Eric in particular, because he's often doing these comedic things, he's the most anime, and he probably screamed too, which is Donnie Moses. He's a good screamer.
Yes.
And then we go to one of Venger's many castles, and the Shadow Demon tells him the news about Warduke having Dungeon Master and wanting to get paid correctly. And Venger says Warduke is either getting very brave or very stupid.
No. Stupid's a strong word for Saturday morning cartoon. I'm surprised he didn't say foolish.
Foolishness. And back in the mines, the orcs are telling him to work faster, and Dinah says, well, you get what you pay for. That's a pretty good comeback, really.
Yeah, that was.
And
except not true in this podcast though. We like to think that you're getting premium value despite paying nothing.
Yes. And poor little Uni is in a cage near where the orcs are having dinner or lunch or whatever.
They're chowing down on something.
Yeah.
Quite contentedly.
Yeah. So and there are a bunch of these dwarf slaves, and meanwhile we also learn that Shield is still walking around free, so she's trying to find everybody. But of course they don't have their magic weapons, so they're just regular kids trying to break rocks. So one of the dwarfs says that he knows where Dungeon Master is, and he'll tell them as long as they free his people. Seems like a good deal.
I agree.
Yeah.
This dwarf has an interesting speech pattern.
Yes, a Yoda-esque speech pattern. Eric encounters a giant snake, and then Sheila finds Uni and frees him, and then Uni's a girl, tells her to give her 5 seconds and then act crazy. So she puts on her cloak, and Uni jumps on the table and starts kicking meat around and stuff, and orcs are chasing her, and Sheila steals all the weapons and brings them to the team, and it turns out Dungeon Master is right through the wall that they're against.
Yeah.
And so they break through there.
Now I would take exception, by the way, to Sheila's plan, because it seems like she could just probably try to take the weapons without causing a big commotion.
Yeah.
They were eating so much, and they were right on the edge of the table too. I think she might have been able to just take them, walk off without attracting so much attention, but she got Uni involved. So.
She knew Uni wanted something to do.
Yeah, that's fair.
Uni hadn't kicked any chicken legs in a while.
No.
So when they break through, they find Dungeon Master, but also they find Venger and Warduke, and the gem stops glowing. Dungeon Master.
That's a dark moment.
Its life force is gone.
Yes.
Eric, meanwhile, is being chased by a giant turtle. And he falls through down a hole that luckily brings him right in where they are. Creates a distraction, and Hank says, "Go for it," and they have another fight with the Frogman and Warduke. And Presto did another spell here.
Well, yeah. Again, it's kind of like the passive fighting, where instead of directly fighting somebody jumps out of the way and then they knock themselves out against the wall.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's the kind of thing I didn't really notice this so much as a kid.
Yeah.
And now watching Super Friends and some of these other shows and just seeing how they avoid direct violence, it's kind of entertaining to see how they do it.
It is now. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think as a kid, I meant to say this earlier, the sort of magic weapons were a little disappointing sometimes. Because, just wanting them to actually get into fights.
Yeah, use his weapons.
Except for the bow. I mean, the bow is cool. Like Eric has a shield.
Yeah.
Unless you're Captain America.
Right.
A shield is not an exciting weapon.
That's right.
But Warduke actually does. He's attacking Hank with his sword, and Hank shoots an arrow into it, which sends it flying, and it cracks the ice that Dungeon Master's in. And frees him, and he's alive.
The life force has returned.
Yes, he was just playing a trick.
Or did it go away in the first place?
Yeah.
Yes.
And then Venger, shoots some energy at him, and he catches it and says, much like evil words, turn them on their side, and they become evil magic becomes good or something. And
yeah.
I don't know what that means, but he throws it back at Venger, who gets vaporized temporarily.
Yeah, Dungeon Master says right away he'll return to his usual form,
Yeah,
soon.
We got to get out of here. And then Hank's like, "Oh, I almost forgot to free the dwarves."
Right.
But they do. They free those dwarves. And,
Pretty good amount of them too.
Yeah, and the orcs and Warduke are giving chase, and then Dungeon Master's showing off here. He makes the volcano there erupt.
Yeah.
Off they go.
Well,
If I were Eric, especially, I'd be thinking, why do you just do that all the time, man?
exactly. That's a perfectly legitimate question.
Yes. And they actually ask him, don't they?
That's why that's one thing I liked about this episode is that they sort of confront him.
Yeah.
They don't really get any answers, but yes, they confront him.
Like, so, one of them says, with power like that, I don't see how anybody could capture you.
Yeah.
And Hank says, unless you wanted them to. The Dungeon Master arches an eyebrow.
Yes, twinkle in the eye.
Yes. The answer does not rest with one's power. It rests within oneself. Oh, brother. That's deep, says Eric. And then he falls in the water because that's what he does.
Yeah.
Everyone's standing over him laughing, but especially Uni.
It seemed like they were making a deliberate choice to make Eric look foolish, but
Yeah.
I don't think Eric was that foolish to express some, it was a little heavy-handed what the Dungeon Master said, and enigmatic is a kind way to put it.
Uh-huh.
And again, I don't blame Eric for pushing back against that. I'm a little disappointed that the cartoon itself, attempted to make him look dumb by punishing him for daring to question the Dungeon Master.
Right.
I don't agree with that. One thing I do like though, I really like the closing music.
Yeah.
And like the end credits of the show. There's just something like, majestic, not like overly aggressive. It's sort of like kind of soothing, but it's just really cool. Like the music of the end credits, which reminds me something I forgot. In some of the episodes, I was very pleased to hear some of the same musical cues
Yes.
from Spider-Man.
Yeah, there seems to be a Marvel Productions music library.
Yes, which I enjoy. So I welcome that.
Yeah, I'm sure some of those cues are in G.I. Joe and Transformers. Maybe even Gem. I don't know.
Quite possible.
Yeah. Yeah, it is a nice piece of music. There's one episode I watched, I think the first shot is Diana's getting some water from a river stream, and she's humming that song.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's funny. I like that.
So, yeah, this is fun. And for me, it was fun revisiting. And I think, like a number of the cartoons we've talked about, it's surprisingly, in a way, well made, considering that it was a Saturday morning cartoon.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing against the people who made them, but
right.
They quite often were just lowest common denominator kind of things. And I think it was better than I thought it would be rewatching.
Yeah.
As an adult 30 years later.
And something that could have been, just like, a concept.
40 years.
Yeah. I mean, something that could have been just like a concept, just kind of forcing it. And they managed to come up with something, pretty entertaining.
Yeah.
And accomplish a lot.
Which I think does a reasonable job of creating a feeling of the game without making it a game, unlike Pokemon.
Yeah.
Yu-Gi-Oh.
Right.
Things that are based on games where they actually play the game or something.
Right. Yeah, I know what you mean.
Imagine Monopoly, the cartoon.
Yeah. My favorite episode that I've seen so far is the one, the Graveyard of the Dragons, or Dragon's Graveyard. So I was curious about this because of the suggestion I read somebody say where they sort of consider killing Venger.
Right, yeah.
And I watched the episode and I was like, wow, this is really good. It deals with things in a pretty serious way.
Yes.
I thought. They don't directly get in that, but they do sort of address that situation. Like, okay, and the language they use is like, we're going to take care of them once and for all.
Yeah.
And then they sort of make some moral choices in the episode. And I thought that was pretty ambitious.
Yeah, and Dungeon
for a
Master's
Saturday morning cartoon.
Concerned about the choices they're making.
Yeah.
Yeah, and a couple of things, at the beginning when they did make that decision, Uni's been hurt, and they're all totally on board with this and angry. And, even Eric is everyone's just changes a little bit. It's nice. And then, at the end, they do. I mean, they get Venger pinned against a wall with some magic handcuffs or something. And it's up to Hank. He's either going to kill him or he ends up freeing him.
Yeah.
And gives a, impassioned speech about how it would have made him like him. It's a good lesson. You could question it from is that really a wise decision? But
yeah, kind of like the whole Batman Joker thing.
Yeah, exactly.
But I thought they made a great case for doing it. But apparently that episode caused some
consternation.
People were upset just the very thought of it and didn't really appreciate the. But I like the dynamic of everybody else just looking looking up to him as the leader,
Right.
and kind of expecting like him to make the decision, and they'll go along with it. And so it's more important for him to kind of have that role as the leader, and sort of makes the choice for them, and then kind of shows them the way with his actions. And also the fact that, kind of like you alluded to, just like they're frustrated, and I like them expressing despair and like frustration at not being able to get home, and showing some emotion about the situation. I like that.
Yeah, and they quite often are frustrated.
Yeah.
I mean, they're either walking through a desert or a swamp, somewhere where they're hungry and they're thirsty, and then usually Dungeon Master will pop up and guide them somewhere. But there are episodes where they all go through things. It's well made.
It's an interesting series.
Yeah. It doesn't make me want to try to play Dungeons & Dragons again.
No, it never did, apparently.
Yeah, not really.
So I guess in that sense, it didn't succeed with you, but it's seemed to have a fairly successful run, and kept the the game in the public consciousness, and
it did.
I guess introduced it probably to a lot of younger people.
I think so.
Wouldn't have been necessarily aware of those unless their older siblings were playing the game.
Yeah, and I think there may have been a push to get younger kids to play it. And again, they built it into something. And then it got bought again.
Yeah. No. Well, Lori had some board game she was showing me.
Yeah.
Where it was more based on those characters.
Right.
So it was like an entry level game, but it was more like just a board game, not a role playing element. I thought that was kind of interesting. I didn't remember that at all.
No, I didn't either.
So yeah, there was some interesting stuff came out in association with the cartoon. But I'm glad we took a look at it. The series was really new to me. It's only 27 episodes, but most of those cartoons that were on for like 3 seasons that long,
right? I
had more exposure to than this, which I said I hardly seen at all.
At least while we're recording this, I mean, there are a couple out of print DVDs versions of it, and there's through various outlets you can find a live Dungeons & Dragons, a live streaming channel that has the cartoon and other things.
Interesting.
Also, a lot of shows of people slightly recognizable playing.
Okay.
And a lot of commercials for those shows.
Okay.
But
interesting.
I picked up the Mill Creek version used.
That's the set we have, yes.
Yeah, I think there's a more deluxe one from someone else.
Okay, yeah, there's no extras.
No.
Little packaging.
Yes.
Yeah, Lori was kind of put in one of the DVDs for us the other night, and usually I'm the one that does all that.
Yeah.
So this is kind of her first time like actually handling the DVDs, and she was like laughing at it, and I was chuckling at it because you and I are very used to Mill Creek, and in many DVDs that have even worse packaging than that.
How bad? Since mine is used, I wasn't sure if I was getting an even worse mine were in like paper sleeves.
Yeah, it was
tucked into a slot or just a square.
Yeah, a bunch of paper sleeves like just stacked and pressed into it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I've definitely seen worse.
Yeah.
At least they had the sleeves.
Right. But they did it.
But it's there, yeah. They put it out, so I think.
And since last year was the 40th anniversary, and they didn't put anything out, I can't imagine.
Yeah, it's a shame, I guess.
Yeah.
But probably all we're going to get.
And that movie was out. I mean, that was the opportunity.
Exactly. Yeah, that would have been the time. And you got these toys, but yeah. Where's the deluxe edition with the Mark Evanier commentary?
Yes, and the Jeffrey Scott commentary.
Yeah. And a Don Most commentary.
Hey, yeah. I was happy to play a mild content.
He does do a good job in this.
He does, yeah.
That character is
and, Willie Ames is good as he is in the heroic leader role.
I agree. That show is well cast.
Yep.
And Peter Cullen is appropriately scary as Venger.
Yes. Mark Evanier says that was his one casting suggestion.
Oh, yeah? Yeah, that's cool. Well done.
Yeah, and of course Frank Welker can play a unicorn.
Yeah.
Of course he can.
Of course, yes.
All right, that wraps up Dungeons & Dragons.
This episode brought to you by Warduke's Half-Off Armor. This episode also brought to you by the Chevy Cavalier. Want to go this way? Please, it's going that way. This episode also brought to you by the 20-sided die. Could it replace the random number generator? Join us next time for another exciting episode of Battle of the Network shows. Learn more, leave feedback, and suggest future episodes at battleofthenetworkshows.com. Follow us on Twitter at BatNetShows, and like our Facebook page, facebook.com/Battle of the Network shows.